Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a leadership expert and an author from Texas, USA, Mr. Jim Carlough. Jim, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me here. I'm very excited to speak to your listeners.
Thank you. Jim is an author, a professional speaker, and a leadership expert. We're going to speak a lot about his book, The Six Pillars of Effective Leadership, A Roadmap to Success. So, Jim, before we get into your book, tell me a little bit about your own journey in leadership and how your experiences shaped the ideas for your book.
So that's an excellent question. I often say that the statement of leaders are born leaders is a misnomer. And I'm a perfect example of that.
Right.
Leadership is developed, and it takes, and you can't do it with a 1 week seminar. It takes years to do it. And I have had an amazing journey. My first entree into leadership started right out of college. And I have been blessed to have worked for a lot of fabulous leaders,
Right.
including having worked for Ross Perot.
Wow.
And those leaders have instilled different things in me that have shaped me to what I am today. So much so that I recently was telling someone I felt very bad inside for the people I first managed because I had no clue what I was doing compared to what I know now.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was 23 years old, I didn't understand compassion and empathy. I was just gonna, we're gonna do this and we're gonna get going. And I probably, put several people in counseling, who knows? But my leadership style today is very, very different. And is very, very, it's just, my style is just very, very different than it was when I first got out of college.
Thank you. And given all your learnings and having worked with an icon like Ross Perot, what was the inspiration to write your book, The Six Pillars of Effective Leadership?
So I thought a couple years ago, I decided I needed to get my mindset ready for when I ultimately retire. But my wife has been telling me for years I can't ever retire because she's afraid that we won't get along if we're both in the house all day together.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking, what would be a natural thing for me to do? And then I realized I had been mentoring people for 25 years and continue to do so, and very much believe that leaders or everyone in life needs a mentor.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's 2 or 3 people that I often call on for advice, depending on the situation, if it's new to me. So from that aspect of it, came some very strong feelings of, what is it that I want to give back? And so as I looked back on all the people that I mentored, I realized there was a connection in terms of the fact that many of these individuals were very intelligent. They knew their industry, but they didn't know people. And I don't mean name dropping people, but they didn't know how to handle difficult situations. They didn't know how to handle when an employee was having a problem and how to address it, as opposed from thinking that it was work related when it may not be. So my 6 pillars are all, as someone recently said to me, more emotional intelligence related.
Yeah.
Except for probably one of them. But if you think about it in that context, I felt that especially now, our leaders are missing kind of this roadmap. And so I started writing a list of all of the attributes that I thought it was important. And there was more than 10.
Yeah.
And then I said, I can't write a book about 10 things for people to implement because that's too many. So I tried to synthesize it down to the 6 that are most prevalent in me. And that's how I got to the 6.
Okay. And we're going to talk about each one of the six in a few minutes. But let's now talk about your book, Jim. How do you define effective leadership in today's fast changing world? And what are some of the biggest challenges leaders face today?
I think one of the biggest challenges leaders face today is the mirage of information that they're getting thrown at them and being
Hmm.
able to sift through it for reality.
Hmm.
I say the same thing both from a business perspective and also a personal perspective with the
Hmm.
media and the way the media and social media has really started to change the world.
Hmm.
And one thing that I think challenges many leaders today
Hmm.
is trying to maintain that integrity path
Hmm.
when you're bombarded with all kinds of stuff,
Hmm.
noise from around that potentially lacks integrity.
Hmm.
And so I thought it was time that I put some principles out there that people could pick up and follow and be able to implement rather easily
Hmm.
to change their own leadership style to get better results.
Hmm.
And these principles have gotten me not only high performing teams, but very, very low turnover in
Hmm.
teams.
Hmm.
And people tend to follow. So for a perfect example, the one pillar that I say is non-negotiable is integrity.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have integrity, you can't build trust with your team.
Hmm.
And so if you're a new leader, the first thing people are going to look for is that consistency
Hmm.
in how you behave and how you respond.
Yeah.
And if you lose that trust,
Hmm.
it's very difficult to gain it back. And
Correct.
today trust is so critical to the
Hmm.
success of an organization and
Right.
to a personal brand. People
Correct.
have to trust what you're doing and what you're saying and that you're walking the talk.
Hmm.
And it all starts with integrity.
Hmm. Very well said. And I was going to talk to you about each of the six that you have spoken about, which are integrity, focus, compassion, stability, empathy, and humor. And you've given me a few thoughts about integrity. But can you share a real world example where integrity made or broke a leader?
Where it made or broke, I'll give you a personal example of
Hmm.
what something that somebody taught me when I was 23 years old. When I was 23 years old, I
Hmm.
ran for local government in the town I grew up in.
Okay.
It was a city council position,
Hmm.
and I won.
Wow.
And I also was reelected 3 years later, so I was
Hmm.
doing something right. But the city manager asked to see me shortly after the election, and
Hmm.
I went in and sat down with him. And he said, "Look, he said, you're a smart guy. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm
Hmm.
going to ask you to do me one favor."
Hmm.
And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Every night when you put your head on the pillow,
Hmm.
I want you to ask yourself the following question.
Right.
Did I do anything today for my own personal benefit and gain
Hmm.
at the expense of another individual, group of individuals, organization, or
Hmm.
whoever?"
Amazing.
And he said, "If you say yes,
Hmm.
you need to reevaluate that day so you don't repeat that."
Hmm.
Do you know, since that day in November of 1983, I have asked myself that question every night.
Amazing.
And do you know, I've never said yes.
Incredible. What an amazing story this one is. And, as you were narrating this, I'm going to take a minute and tell you about a similar thing my father taught me. And that was that every morning when you're standing in front of the mirror shaving, if you can look yourself in the eye and say, yesterday I did not knowingly harm anybody or do anything wrong, that's the only justification you ever need in your life.
That is correct.
So,
That is correct. Your father is a smart man. And this gentleman, Don, who gave me this advice, I don't think he realized how life changing it would be for
absolutely.
me.
And such an amazing advice he gave you. But, Jim, moving on, your second pillar is focus. And my question is, why is it critical for leaders to focus, and how can they cultivate it in a world full of distractions?
That's a great question. I'm going to give you a perfect example of a person who built something with extreme focus. Um, and, and that's Jeff Bezos at Amazon.
Yeah.
He started with an idea with regard to selling books online
Mm.
and then said, I can take this and make this, I'm going to make this up, a retail empire. What he built with Amazon was so disruptive. It has put a lot of retail establishments out of business.
Correct.
However, he has had unwavering focus on that one steady principle of I want to get something to somebody's house in a day or two, and they don't have to get in the car. And if you think about it, during COVID, I'd have to go back and look, but the stats got to be through the roof in terms of how rapidly they
Correct.
grew. I
Correct.
can just tell from all of the distribution centers here in Texas that I visibly see
Mm.
how much they've grown.
Absolutely.
If he didn't have that focus,
Mm.
he would have never been able to achieve that.
Mm. Amazing. My next question is on compassion, which is your third pillar. And my question is, how does compassion contribute to building high performing teams? And can compassion and tough decisions be balanced?
They absolutely can be balanced.
Mm.
And there is a difference between compassion and empathy. And so I'm sure you'll get to
Yeah,
empathy.
I will.
But in terms of compassion, a leader has to be able to understand and sense when a team member is struggling.
Mm.
And they have to be able to approach that individual in such a way as not to startle or harm them, but in a way to show support for what they may be going through.
Mm.
They, as a leader, I can't solve everybody's problem,
Mm.
but I can help point you in the direction of where to go to potentially get help,
Mm.
whether that's another supervisor, whether that's some additional learnings, whether that's, spending more time with your family, if it's a personal issue, but that builds a much stronger team.
Mm.
If you're able to it shows people that you care.
Right.
And if you are working for someone who you think is so self-centered that they don't care about you,
Mm.
you need to reevaluate that.
Mm.
I always want to know what's going on in my team's personal lives, going on with their kids, going on, because you never know when that's going to change. But knowing those things allows you to
Mm.
respond quicker when you see a change in that behavior.
Mm. Well said. Jim, your fourth pillar is stability. And my question is, how can leaders project stability in uncertain times and times of crisis? And a great one example I'd love to get from you is uh, instability during COVID.
So COVID challenged all of us in
Absolutely.
many ways.
Yeah.
The first way was all of us that were going to an office could no longer go to an office.
Mm.
Those of us who wanted to go shopping for clothes couldn't just go shopping for clothes.
Mm.
It was a dramatic impact to everyone.
Correct.
And I think in terms of stability, you have to demonstrate that regardless of the environmental changes. So let's just say the environmental changes are now your work environment is different, right?
Mm.
A manager and a leader has to be able to show that consistently they can respond to that and still communicate. So
Mm.
while you and I may not be in the office anymore together at the water cooler or the getting coffee,
Yeah.
we can now have Zoom. We can now have interpersonal discussions.
Mm.
And one of the things we did during COVID was we started having Thursday afternoon concerts.
Mm.
And so we would because we knew the local artists were hurting for business because they couldn't go play.
Mm.
So we picked. So our organization's fairly is remote. So different people would volunteer to get a local um, musician or a group of musicians to play for 30 minutes, and
Mm.
we would pay them.
Wow.
We would pay them.
Mm.
And it did a couple of things. We opened it up not just to the employees, but to their families.
Mm.
And so the families could gather around the worker's computer and see a local musician from some locale in the US and have entertainment for a good 30 to 45 minutes, still part of the workday.
Wow.
So this wasn't after hours. So we
Mm.
sacrificed some time in the work to give people a release and entertainment.
How interesting.
And so we created new ways of communication, including
Mm.
having a weekly all hands
Mm.
instead of a monthly all
Yeah.
hands, and talked about the things that we've accomplished for the last 7 days,
Mm.
and had employees talk about what they accomplished.
Mm.
Sales would say what they sold. Account management may talk about something they did with a customer.
Mm.
Product development would talk about a new idea they had that they were brewing up in terms of it. So it changed the dynamic, but I think it also opened up the communication from an interdepartmental perspective as
Mm.
well,
Very interesting.
and created a lot of stability for people to not get concerned about what they were doing or how they were doing it, or to get their mind off of COVID.
Fascinating. The fifth pillar you talk about is empathy. And my question is, how does empathy differ from compassion in leadership? And how can leaders balance authority and empathy?
So balancing authority and empathy is no different than balancing authority and compassion.
Mm.
I think they're similar in that regard.
Okay.
Let me give you an example of a real life example of empathy, and how I struggled with trying to solve the challenge. When I worked at Perot, and some of your readers, and I'm sure you'll remember old green screen
Yeah.
technology, um, before people had a mouse. And it was a claim system. And this team worked for me, and we made the decision to sunset it
Mm.
because we had developed two additional platforms that were Windows based.
Mm.
So I had the honor of having to tell a group of 25 people, I think it was about 25 people, that their job was going away over the next 3 years.
Mm.
And I struggled with what would I tell them. Part of me wanted to go in and just say, look, your job's going away. But I really struggled with it, and I really reflected a lot on what would I want my leader to tell me
Mm.
about my position and what's going to happen with it.
Amazing.
So I came up with three things.
Mm-hmm.
My sole goal
Mm.
was to ensure that nobody jumped ship and left the organization or their job before it was time, because clients would take time to implement a new platform.
Mm.
So we would know that 6 months from now they would go live. So my first commitment was I would give you as much notice as I physically could and had available to me, which
Mm.
meant if I knew your job was going away because you're supporting client X and they're going live in September,
Mm.
you would know it was September. You knew you had 6 months to look for a job.
Mm.
That was commitment number one.
Mm.
Commitment number two, if you wanted to learn the new technology platforms, as those customers converted, we would need people in those areas.
Mm.
I would make available people that would teach them those new platforms and those new programming languages
Mm.
during the workday if they wanted to learn that.
Mm.
So that by the time it was time for them to transition, they knew the product, they knew how to work it, they knew their role, and they could transition into that job.
Very well said.
I also said to those people,
Mm,
If you're not interested in, this is the third thing, if you're not interested in moving into that direction
mm,
and you're interested in finding a new job within the company, I will personally help you find the right job for you.
mm,
But I also went one step further. I said, if you would like to leave the company, I will also personally help you get a job on the outside that fits you.
mm,
My one goal was that nobody would leave before it was time for them to leave, and I accomplished that goal. But I accomplished something else that I never anticipated accomplishing. That team over that 3 year period had the highest employee satisfaction rating of any team in the company.
mm.
I never expected that. When those results came out and someone from HR came and sat down with me and said, um, I just have to congratulate you.
Mm.
That little dinky team over there that you're downsizing has the highest satisfaction in the entire company.
Wow.
So that tells you something about a leader who focuses on, and I didn't know how to approach the situation. I
Mm,
really went in dark and I just reflected on how would I want to be treated by my leader?
mm.
And
Amazing.
so there's a great example of being able to balance the needs of the organization with the needs of the employees and come out with something successful.
Fascinating. Your sixth pillar, and I think we have time for two, maybe three questions. Your sixth pillar, Jim, is humor. How can humor enhance a leader's effectiveness? Can you share a story of how humor diffused a tense situation?
I absolutely can. So, and it's interesting that you zeroed in on that. When I use humor, I don't mean being a stand-up
Yeah,
comedian
yeah.
and telling jokes at the water cooler.
Mm,
I use humor to diffuse a tense situation, to kick off a discussion, to refocus a group within a meeting if we get sidetracked.
mm,
But I have an example where I had two people who were working for me, and I heard them arguing down from my office, and I went out to see what was happening. And I walked up to them, and I really wish I could remember exactly what I said.
mm,
But I said something like, if you guys don't settle down, I'm going to need to get boxing gloves,
mm,
something to that effect or
mm,
whatever.
mm,
And just said, and I'm not going to allow that to happen.
mm,
And they both looked at me and whatever. And I said, let me help you. Come with me. Let's go have a seat in the conference room.
mm,
So, well, maybe it was my office. Oh, we sat down and I said to them, I said, okay, I want to help you get through what you're going through because I don't understand. Is this work related or personal? Work related. Okay, it's work related. What's the problem? Well, we have this challenge. Okay. And what are you talking about? We're trying to figure out a solution. Okay. So as they started to talk and argue, I realized that both were so wrapped around their own personal biases
mhm,
they really didn't see that the perfect solution was combining what they both wanted to do.
mm,
And so I then made a joke. I forget what I said about I can't, this was many years ago, so I can't remember exactly what I said, but I made something humorous up to get them to understand. And it wasn't as simple as you can't see the forest
yeah,
through the trees,
yeah, yeah.
but they really, that was the situation. They
Mm,
couldn't see the forest through the trees. So
mm,
eventually I got them to understand that they both were right.
mm,
And it produced an emotional reaction,
mm.
sad emotion. That one of the individuals started to tear up and cry. And I asked him, I said, did I upset you? And that person said, no, you
Mm.
did. I said, then why are you crying? And that person said, because you always do the right thing.
Wow.
And I said, but why does that upset you?
Mm,
She said, because it was very easy to do what you just did, and we
mm.
didn't do that.
Amazing.
But no, you didn't.
Mm.
But that's where humor can come
How
in
interesting. How
and
interesting.
settle things down.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. And my last question to you, I could keep talking to you. You're such a fascinating speaker, and you've got such a wealth of knowledge and information, but unfortunately, the clock is running ahead of me. My last question for you, looking ahead, how do you see the future of leadership evolving? And what new skills, in your opinion, will leaders need?
So let me first add to something that everybody's talking about with regard to AI.
Hmm.
AI is not going to replace leaders.
Correct.
AI cannot do this interpersonal thing and realize when somebody needs compassion or empathy.
Hmm.
And so the first thing from my perspective, that is never going to change. And so, but leadership is going to continue to evolve.
Hmm.
I think based upon where we are today in the world, integrity and trust will continue to be at the forefront.
Yeah.
And will need to be at the forefront
Hmm.
for quite some time.
Right.
There's a lot of change that has to occur internationally to bring what I call peace back to everyone.
Correct.
And I think those are going to be the key tenets that leaders are going to have to get their arms around as the world continues to evolve.
Very well said. And on that note, Jim, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your journey, about your book, The Six Pillars of Effective Leadership. I thought you gave me some amazing points for me to think about, for my viewers and listeners to think about when we spoke about the six pillars, which are integrity, focus, compassion, stability, empathy, and humor. The examples you gave us for each of these are fascinating and will help us to remember these well. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
And thank you for having me on your show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.